thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the fourth key word in this prayer, heart, which in Hebrew is sometimes pronounced Levav, or more often in a shorter form, Lev. Now, different cultures throughout history have had different conceptions of how the human body works, and this is also true of the ancient Israelite writers of the Bible. They knew that the heart was an organ in the chest that sustains life. There's mention of a heart attack in the Bible, Naval, whose heart died inside of him and he became like stone. But the biblical authors talk about the heart in many other ways that might seem strange to modern readers, and that's because these Israelites had no concept of the brain or any word for it. They imagined that all of a human's intellectual activity takes place in the heart. For example, you know with your heart in the Bible. Your heart is where you understand and make connections. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom dwells in the heart. And your heart is what you use to discern between truth and error, like Solomon did when he was king. So the heart is where you think and make sense of the world, and it's where you do more. In the Bible, the heart is where you feel emotions. You feel pain in your heart, like Hannah did when she couldn't have any children. In fact, the phrase, a broken heart, comes from ancient biblical Hebrew. You also experience fear in your heart. Your heart can melt or be distressed. Your heart can even be depressed. But then, on the flip side, your heart is where you experience joy. In Hebrew, to be happy is to be good of heart, or to have a heart of joy. So the heart is the generator of physical life. It's also the center of your intellectual and emotional life, and there's more. In biblical Hebrew, the heart is where you make choices motivated by your desires. So David had it in his heart to build a temple for God. Your heart is where your affections are centered. They're called the desires of your heart. And if you really want something and go after it, it's like what Nathan said to David, whatever's in your heart, go and do it. So that in the Bible, the heart is the center of all parts of human existence, as in the well-known proverb, guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life. Now, the prophet Jeremiah believed that the human heart was fundamentally broken. He said, the heart of a human is deceitful above all, irreversibly sick. Who can even understand it? He had watched a whole generation turn away from God. They started sacrificing their children as if that were a good thing. So this is why, in the imagination of the Hebrew prophets, the only hope for humanity is the total renewal of the human heart. Moses predicted that if Israel was ever going to love their God, their heart would need to be circumcised, which is a very vivid and surprising metaphor about removing evil and stubbornness from the human heart. David, after he committed murder and adultery, pleads with God to create in me a pure heart. The prophet Ezekiel hoped for a day when God would remove the heart of stone and give his people a new heart of soft flesh, which is very similar to Jeremiah's hope that God would write the commands of the Torah on the hearts of his people. And that brings us all the way back to the Shema. Every day, God's people are called to devote to God their whole body and mind, their feelings and their desires, their future and their failures. This is what it means to love the Lord your God with all of your heart.
We're going to read in 1 Samuel 15. If you guys want to turn there, starting in verse 1. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkey. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, Go away, leave the Amalekites, so that I do not destroy you along with them. For you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and his and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered, The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Enough, Samuel said to Saul. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. Samuel said, Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God in Gilgal. But Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel.
We've been studying out this the Shema, as Luke said, and in Deuteronomy 6. And at the end of it, we're doing these word studies. We studied out listen, we studied out Lord, we studied out the word love last week, and then today we're going to actually end our little part 2 of our love series on this word Levav. Can you say Levav? Levav. Are we saying it right? No. I really, Sabrina, appreciate you reading, and it was a long read. It'd be great. Levav, to love God with all your heart. Right? The video is so helpful and instructive because it gives you a great baseline for some of the things we're going to talk about. And I will tell you that today's sermon, a lot of it is from things that I've really recently become aware of in my own life, which I will share a story about. And also inspired by a sermon I recently heard by Timothy Keller, who's one of my favorite speakers. And so I've taken a lot of material from his sermon that I heard. It was really helpful to me. And I was thinking about, to love God with all your heart. Mike did a great job last week, I thought, speaking about loving God with all you are. And so there's a lot of overlap there, right? I think that sermon could have been this one. And so as I heard that, I was I really felt Mike did a good job focusing on the lifestyle of love. And I want to look into this feelings part of our love for God. What does it mean to love God with all your heart when you think of the heart as the center of your emotion? Right? Because the heart is more than that, but that's how we still think of it like that, right? What do you feel in your heart? You know what I mean? And we have a lot of teaching rolling around about the heart, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I want to spend time diagnosing the heart so that we can understand how to better use it to love God, right? So what does the Bible have to say about the heart? Well, one, the heart is hard to understand. This is not an exhaustive list of what the Bible says about the heart, but these are the things that come to mind when you're diagnosing a problem, right? When you go to the doctor, you don't usually go there just to be told everything that's good with you. You go and you talk about what's concerning. And so when the Bible talks about what's concerning about the human heart, it talks about how it's hard to understand. It must be guarded because it cannot be trusted. Right? It's not like a really nice, like God doesn't have a really high opinion of the way the human heart operates in a normal human. Right? And, I want to start and want to hit these three things, and we're really going to focus on the last one because I think I've seen in my life the most insidious and the thing that most hurts our ability to love God with our heart, with our emotion, right? So firstly, the heart is hard to understand, right? These are some proverbs for you. I think the first one might be Ramayan's favorite verse, is what he's told me before. The purpose of a person's heart are deep waters. The latter part says, but a person of wisdom can draw them out. Your heart's purposes are deep. Perhaps you feel it often like you don't even understand them. And in Jeremiah 17, we'll hit this, but the second part of the verse is, who can understand it? Or beyond understanding, right? The heart is complex. In Proverbs 14, it says that no one else can understand the bitterness in somebody's heart or share its joy. Only you really know what you feel. Other people can sympathize, they maybe even can empathize, but they can't really know what it is to be you. Only you know what it is to be you, unless you're like, I don't know what it is to be me. I'm very confused about it. We're going to use this story about Saul as a template to show that he was a victim of his own heart, and not in the good way. Yeah. The heart, well, first of all, let's talk about this very overwhelming. This is called an emotion wheel, right? Some of you are triggered by this.
Yes.
You're like, that's a lot of emotions. I don't like seeing that there are that many. You see, perhaps you can't read it, but it gives you, the idea of an emotion wheel, a lot of times counselors will use this to help you identify what you're feeling. So when you're a kid, how are you feeling? I'm angry, right? I'm hungry, right? That's happy. Hungry is not really exactly a feeling, right? It inspires feelings like anger or hanger. I feel sad. Okay, what do you mean? Do you feel hurt? Do you feel guilty? Do you feel depressed? Why do you feel depressed? Is it because you feel inferior? Is it because you feel empty? As you take it out further, the emotions of a human heart are deeply complex. Yeah. And discovering what you feel sometimes is a hard thing. We operate in a very simple level, like I want ice cream, which is how I always feel in some ways. And so I'm going to go get them. In that way, what feelings do for you is oftentimes feelings are the source for you. I'm not sure where that went. There was supposed to be a slide there. But feelings are like the spring that feeds a river. Okay? So you think about a spring-fed river. Whatever's coming out of the spring is going to travel downstream. Feelings are like that. Feelings produce action. Guard your heart, for out of it flows all things. Right? Yeah. We're going to talk about that in a second. Did you know that your amygdala, which is part of your brain, spits out emotions when something happens to you? Let's say there's a car wreck, or you get a text message that you are dreading. You know what I mean? Like, you ever had that name pop up on your text and you're just like, I wish I never saw it. I wish I could erase this moment. I'm so terrified to see what this says. Your amygdala is triggering you to feel something. It happens in under half a second. It's like the average 0.3 seconds. Your amygdala's like, this is what you feel. And some of you are like, I know exactly what I feel right now. And some of you are like me, it takes you literally sometimes days. You're like, I don't know. I just feel numb because I can't process what I feel. Perhaps you felt that before. I find it so amazing that I can act on a feeling that I don't understand. Yeah. So if you've ever been just snippy with somebody, like if I'm short with Kristen, sometimes I have no idea why I was irritated by that thing because it doesn't normally irritate me. Why am I irritated? And she'll ask me, why are you so irritated with me? And I will usually say, I don't know, but I'm sorry. Let me figure it out. And usually I can trace back. It actually had nothing to do with her. She was just an easy way for me to project my anger. A lot of anger is like this, or whatever emotion that we project those things. Those things come out. The heart is hard to understand. The heart, therefore, must be guarded. So this is where I have the river analogy, right? There it is. This visual can help you. When you feel something, you will act on it. Most people do. Unless perhaps you are the rare person, and Jesus talks about this a lot, who has the self-discipline to not act on an emotion that you know could lead you down a dangerous path. right? It says the simple walk into danger and they just do it, but the prudent heed advice. Like the idea in Proverbs often is that the simple-minded don't reflect on their feelings. They don't know what they feel, and they act. This is what children do. Right? When children do something crazy, you're like, why are you crying? Like, there have been times I've asked my own, this is not a good question to ask my children. Why are you crying right now? Like, why? The tears are not the appropriate response to this. That's not usually helpful to someone who's crying. But it's what I feel in the moment. Right. I'm frustrated by their illogical sadness. Yes. and now I'm reacting in my anger to their poor reaction, and we're just, it's a vicious cycle, right? The heart must be guarded because the heart is vulnerable. Other people can hurt us. Yeah. Right? We've all felt this. Your past can creep back in to haunt you. Perhaps you thought you left something in your rearview mirror and then it comes back in your life. A person, a thing, a memory. For me, sometimes it can feel like I'm just one discouraging text away from heart anxiety, from stress, right? Perhaps you feel that as well. We all have particular vulnerabilities. This is a picture of the Death Star.
Yeah.
The Death Star, in this analogy, is like your heart.
Nice.
Who among you know where I'm going with this, or you think you know where I'm going with this? So, in the movie Star Wars, the first movie, A New Hope, great movie. You'll go back and watch it, and you'll be like, this isn't that great of a movie. But it was a classic, and so we all have to agree it's a great movie. And at the end of it, they have to destroy this planet-sized, a moon-sized weapon that can destroy planets. So the bad guys have this big weapon that costs, I don't know how much money to build. And they have to destroy this thing, or else, the Rebel Alliance will get destroyed and the universe will be in jeopardy of imperialism forever. So pretty intense. So Luke Skywalker, our hero, he gets in his X-Wing and he flies, and they find out from, if you watch the movies more recently, you figure out how they get this information. But they figure out the Death Star has a vulnerability. The vulnerability is the thermal exhaust pipe or something like that. It's this hole that is this direct line, just this tunnel, all the way to the vulnerable heart of the Death Star. And if you could shoot basically their version of a missile down this thing, it will destroy the entire thing. Now, why does this exist? Well, people were asking for 30 years. It was the number one criticism of this movie, was that people were like, I don't understand. Couldn't they just put a panel on it or something like that? And what you find out later is that vulnerability was intentionally placed there. Now, this was Star Wars' way of saving the problem of the franchise. They went back, they did a prequel, they're like, this is how we cover up our earlier mistake.
Right.
And how it's covered up is that a good guy masquerading as a bad guy, who was forced to build the Death Star, the primary engineer, built within it a vulnerability, a critical error, that if you could, small enough so the bad guys wouldn't see it, but big enough so that when the good guys did see it, they could exploit it. Well, your heart is like the Death Star. You all have a unique vulnerability in your heart. I don't know what it is, but you have one. There are things I could say to you that wouldn't affect you, that would make other people crumble and want to die, right? And then there are things I could tell you that make your life horrible in 5 seconds that someone else wouldn't care about. Yeah. It's because of our past, the way we're wired, our natural dispositions, whatever it may be. We're wired for certain anxieties, for maybe it's our past trauma, maybe it's a thing, maybe it's something we're afraid of, whatever it may be. We're wired a certain way. We all have that vulnerability. Yeah. And your heart is endangered, so therefore it must be guarded. Yep. Right? You must guard your heart because from it flows all things, right? This is so important. But finally, while those two things are true about the heart, it leads us to what I think is the most insidious of the heart's problems, which is that your heart, there's the thermal exhaust pipe. If you were wondering, what does this look like? There it is. The heart cannot be trusted. You read we watched in the movie that the heart is deceitful above all things, beyond cure. Who can understand it? Now, Jeremiah, if you read any Jeremiah, was a pretty pessimistic guy for good reason. He had a really rough life. And he was speaking to Israel in a really hard time to be an Israelite. It was a really, really bad time. And he just convinced that humans were just wicked and terrible and never did the right thing. And even when they told you they wanted to do the right thing, they didn't really mean it, and they always showed their true colors in the end, right? That's how he felt about people. Now, probably mostly we don't think all people are that bad, but if we're really honest, we know that our capacity for self-deception is shockingly high.
Yeah.
I've been surprised by this in my own life recently, and I'll tell that story. The heart has an almost infinite capacity for self-deception. Infinite. There is no more dangerous tool of, if you're going to put a word on it, the heart or the devil or Satan or however you think about the darkness in our world. There's no more dangerous tool than for you to deceive yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And the capacity is almost infinite. And this story of Saul is the perfect example of the heart's capacity to deceive itself. And we're going to look at his story as a way to engage our own heart, right? So what is self-deception? It's when you know the truth, but it's too painful to accept, so you smother it. It's when the implications of a truth are so traumatic that you give in to a clever lie that your heart has created to avoid the pain of reality. Self-deception. And we are all susceptible to it. Let me give you 3 examples with increasing seriousness. Okay? This is a quote from my son this week. This is nothing like Dad's handwriting. Now, let me give you some context, because that makes no sense. St. Patrick's Day was last week. And in our family, and I understand people not wanting to do this, I'm delighted to engage in what I call innocent fiction with my kids. So I think about this like, to a certain degree, like Santa in my mind is this way. You don't have to agree, but that's where I'm at with it. Like, I'm happy to engage in innocent fiction. If my kids ask me straight up and I can't manipulate the conversation a certain way innocently, I'll just tell them. Not too long ago, Rowan was like, give it to me straight, Dad. He said this to me. Is the tooth fairy real? Tell me the truth. I said, no. He was like, I won't tell Kate. You know what I mean?
That's awesome.
So recently, St. Patrick's Day came up, and something my dad used to do with us is he used to pretend, we used to set traps for leprechauns. Maybe you did this in school or something like that. And so we built this trap out of magnet tiles, right, for this leprechaun, and we left treasure, and I gave him all these famous Irish folklore myths about what leprechauns like and don't like, and I didn't know if I was going to convince them. I wasn't worried. It was more about just engaging in the fiction for the magic of childhood, right?
Sure.
And so we grabbed one of Kristen's like fake necklaces or something like that. She had this, it was Kate, sorry, my daughter. She had this really big, gaudy fake necklace. And it was like, well, the leprechaun's going to really want this. And if you can trap the leprechaun, they'll give you a pot of gold. Perhaps you've heard this before. Is it real? I'm not saying I don't know. It's nice because I guess I don't really know. I mean, I don't think it's real. But so anyway, I tell my kids this myth, and they're like, well, we can't try to catch him. I'm like, let's do it. And at first they're pretty skeptical, but as we get into it, you can see he wants himself to be convinced. You know, and he's like, this is so fun. Like, I want to believe this. And so he's like, I don't think it's real. And I'm like, you believe what you want. He's like, I think it's real, though. You know, and I was like, you can believe what you want. He's like, it's real. You know what I mean? Like, that's all I did. They just, like, kids want to believe. And so we did it. We set this trap up. I was actually really proud of it. And then, but to give myself plausible deniability, I couldn't spring the trap, obviously. Because he was going to ask me, did you do this? I needed to be able to say no. And so I had Jeff do it. So I was like, go spring the trap. Obviously, we can't catch the leprechaun because, well, there was no leprechaun. So we came home, and the trap was sprung, and the coins had been taken. But Jeff has since given back to me. And I think I still owe you $5, actually. Because he had to leave money. We had the leprechaun leave a little bit of money, you know, because I wanted there to be some victory. Leprechaun gets away, and I wrote a letter from the leprechaun. I was actually really proud of this poem. And, you know, it was like, he, good try with your trap. Maybe it was good enough to catch a rat. You know, and it kind of went on and on. And I got really into it. And they got home, and they're like, dude, he's real. He's real. But we didn't get him. I'm so sorry. He wrote a letter. My son has definitely seen my handwriting. And I could tell he's looking at it, and he's like, this looks a lot like Dad's handwriting. But he was like, he said this to Mom. He said, this looks nothing like Dad's handwriting. And we knew what he was doing. He was trying to convince himself, because he didn't want reality to be, there are no such thing as leprechauns. And I didn't dissuade him from that notion, because he's still at the age where I think the magic of childhood is still there. And so I'm like, you know, if he would have asked me straight, Dad, tell me the truth, I would tell him it's not real. But he never asked me. Why do you think he never asked me? I think deep down he knew the truth.
Yeah.
But he just, if you ask him, don't be the one to be like, your dad told me, you know what I mean? Like, don't do that. Like, it's still a fiction in our home. We'll see if it lasts for another year. I hope it lasts for another year. And if it doesn't, well, we'll just have fun with Kate and Noel together for the future, right? And then he'll learn and he'll understand it was fun fiction and it was all good. He chose that deception because it was easier for him. And he was kind of magical, right? So there's that. That is self-deception. It's, an innocuous one. So this is a quote from yours truly about 4 weeks ago. I shared this story with you, but I want to share it again. So I've been involved in a situation that's going on back in Gainesville with a brother there that we were working together for a long time, and a lot has come out in his character, and I've been asked to kind of speak to him about his character, right? And so these guys came in for some conflict resolution between this guy and some other, and they worked it out, but the guy that I've worked with has had a pretty obstinate heart for a while about some things. And his heart kind of cracked in a good way, finally. And so these guys that got involved asked me, Kyle, we kind of need you to open that door further, and we need you to tell him what you see. And I said, okay, I'll do it. But I was kind of terrified, because I really care what this guy thinks about me. Right? And so I got on the phone with him, and totally chickened out. Total coward. I didn't do it. And I had reasons for it. Even as the conversation was going, I was making up excuses for why I wasn't going to be able to say what I needed to say. And anyway, I went, and afterwards I even got back and I was like, I feel like I did a pretty good job. But I knew in my heart, I did not do a good job. I was a total coward. I was a wimp. I totally wimped out. And I went back to talk to these guys that had kind of given me this instruction, you need to go do this. And I told them in such a way, they could tell I was trying to save myself. Well, I didn't say exactly, but we ran out of time, and he didn't really open the door. I actually blamed him. He didn't really open the door for me. And they saw right through me. And I knew the moment that I was going to get rocked. The guy who ended up rocking my world, Jeff, he was like, okay, Kyle, I hear what you're saying. You didn't have enough time. If you did have enough time, would you have said what you need to say? I mean, he just cut right through my mistakes. Like Samuel saw.
Right.
It's like, okay, I can lie, which I'm not going to do, or I can get my world rocked. And I was like, I don't think I would have. He's like, I'm disappointed in you. Because I think of you as a man of God, but that was a cowardly decision. And he went at it for about 10 minutes. And I needed every single minute. My thought when I got off that phone call was, I did my best. But even I knew I wasn't really my best. I knew that. But that's what I told myself to convince myself to avoid the pain of having to say the thing that I was afraid to say. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So I got messed up for it. And I needed it. And I went back and I did the thing I needed to do, and it was fine. So let me give you a final example that's a lot more intense, okay? This is in orders of, intensity. Self-deception can exist on a much bigger level. In World War II, this is a picture of General Eisenhower in World War II and General Patton. This is them at a town called Ohrdruf. Definitely not now. I'm not very German. So it's spelled Ohrdruf. It's a town where a concentration camp was. And this was at the end of the war. And General Eisenhower would go from town to town, and concentration camps were almost always close to a town center because the undesirables, the Germans called them, were always carted through these towns on their way to the concentration camp, pick up supplies, so on and so forth. And every time he'd go to a town, the villagers would always say, I've not heard, I didn't even know this was happening. We had no idea this was happening. We didn't know this was happening. They just kind of kept saying that. And he got so fed up with these villagers, because he was obvious that they knew, that he paraded them, he marched them at gunpoint to the concentration camp that was no more than a mile away from the village. And he made them bury the bodies. Wow. And later that night, the mayor of the town and his wife, they killed themselves. Why did they do that? Because they knew the truth the whole time. They knew what was happening. And they knew what was happening was terrible, and they chose blindness because they couldn't face it. So that's obviously a whole nother... Self-deception can exist in an innocent way, in a sweet way. It can exist in a more personally dangerous way. And it can exist corporately. In an ultimately dangerous way. So we rationalize. Why? Because the heart is concerned with self-preservation, not godliness.
So true.
Your heart doesn't want to be godly in its natural state.
Yep.
It wants to protect itself.
Yep.
And, this sermon isn't going to be about how do we purify our heart, which is a great sermon to do, and perhaps we'll have a second part at some point. There's a sermon about diagnosing the reason we struggle to love God with all of our heart. Because it lies to you. Your heart lies to you. And what are the tools our heart uses for self-deception? We'll look at the story of Saul. What happened in the story of Saul, right? Saul, he was told to completely wipe out this people. And obviously, we could stop and have a whole sermon about how we feel about that command of God. Like, what do you mean wipe out all of them? And perhaps in time we will talk about that. So God gives him this clear instruction. Have you noticed with Saul that he says, when Samuel comes, he's like, we did it! Celebrate! And Samuel's like,
No, you didn't.
do you hear that too? He was told to wipe out even all the cattle. Why was he doing that? Because God was concerned with the purification of humanity.
Yeah.
People were concerned with building empire. And so something that often ancient cultures would do is that when you defeated another kingdom or king, you would keep the king alive to parade them around to show them that I'm a king of kings. And you keep the plunder for your wealth. And notice how Saul, how he twists it. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Saul says, we did this, yes. First of all, we completely did the thing you want us to do. And Samuel's already like, come on, bro. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
all right, I'll let him finish at least. And Saul's like, and we did, and the stuff we took, we devoted it to God. And it's like, okay. Samuel wait. And then you notice his sarcasm? He's like, do you hear that too?
Yeah.
The
Right.
bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle. And he's like, and then his first tool of rationalization is he blames others.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
The soldiers brought these from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle, but we totally destroyed the rest. You see that? Who is responsible for this choice? Saul. Saul's responsible. He's the leader. What does he do? He shifts the blame on the soldiers to try to preserve his own reputation. If someone's been married 6 times and they've gotten divorced 6 times, it's one thing for those. Look, relationships don't always work out. And there are biblical, legitimate reasons to not be with a spouse. But if you meet somebody who it's been 6 times, and all they say is, yeah, just keep picking bad ones, what are you going to think about that person?
Right.
You're going to think, are you sure it's them? You know what I mean? That's what you're going to think. Now, if it happens to somebody once, you just have empathy and love, right? Because that's so hard and terrible, and you assume the best. But 6 times?
Right.
The people in the world are like that. We are like that.
Yeah.
We are the common. Look, I am the common denominator in most of the problems in my life. Well, in fact, all the problems in my life. How am I contributing to those? Jeff Chacon, this brother who rebuked me, really brought me face to face, like Samuel did with Saul, to my own self-deception. I'm very grateful for that. And if he didn't do it, I would have kept living in it. So the first thing we do is we blame shift. Secondly, we virtue signal. You guys heard this term before?
Yeah.
Virtue signaling. It's going out of your way to draw attention to your good character or your moral uprightness, often as a way to distract from our moral failure. So for me, my virtue signaling in my situation was me saying, in the past, I told Jeff this, I've said these things before. And it wasn't my role. Oh, he crushed me for that line. I'll never say that again. He's like, what does this have to do with the role? You're a man of God. And I was like, okay. I pointed out my own virtue so he would overlook my moral failure. Because I couldn't face it, and so I deflected. Saul does this too. But we did it. The soldiers brought these, but we did it so we could sacrifice to the Lord. You see what he's doing?
Yeah.
He's like, but we did it for God. We gave the best to God. And Samuel sees right through it. There's a story I heard recently about a boy who his parents got home with all the groceries, and they said, hey, mommy's got to leave, and I got to do some work upstairs. You can play with these bags if you want, the paper bags. And if you watch, even when you have kids, you don't have them, you'll watch them play with the package their toy came in, and you're like, why did I buy that toy? Like I should just give them a box.
Right.
And so the boy's like, we'll call him Tommy. Nobody's named Tommy in here, right? Okay, we're good. So Tommy's like, can I play with these bags? And his parents are like, yeah, you can totally play with the bags, but put them away when you're done. And then Tommy says, yeah. Parents come back in an hour, and the bags are everywhere. Like a mess that only a 5 or 6 year old can make. Obliviously. And Tommy's now playing the piano. They come down, they say, Tommy, what happened? And Tommy said, well, I'm singing songs to Jesus. And his dad said this, you have no business praising God while you live in disobedience. And he was like, Tommy got rocked. You know what I mean? Tommy got rocked. I don't know. This is a story I heard from somebody else. I'm not Tommy. Nobody in here is Tommy. Like, you know what I mean? But wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is Saul. Saul's like, no, we did this good thing. And Samuel's like, what makes you think God wants these offerings more than he wants your obedience?
Right.
Man, Tommy was virtue signaling. Just like Saul was, just like I was.
Wow.
You know, one of the things that I've seen in my own life as well is this phrase I say, but I prayed about it. You know, something I learned about prayer is that prayer, as beautiful as it is also really dangerous without the right ingredients.
Yeah.
So, this is a little shout out to Mike Paul. It's really important to him that he bakes great chocolate chip cookies. Okay, and I've probably shared this before. Perhaps chocolate chip cookies are important to you as well. They're not as important to you as they are to mine. I guarantee you.
God bless him.
But the ingredients have to be just right for that cookie to taste just right. He won't even let me bake it right away. He's like, when you take this out of the freezer, you got to leave it out. I don't even remember the instruction, but it's pretty specific, or else it won't. Or else I'm not responsible for whatever happens to cookies if you don't follow it. Like, all right, it's fine. And so, if you're baking cookies and you add salt instead of sugar, that's a serious problem.
Yeah.
Those cookies are going to taste disgusting.
Yes.
And you only missed one ingredient. If you failed to put the sugar in, you don't even replace it with something bad, but you just forgot the sugar. That cookie you're going to take a bite. What do you think? Is this it? You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to taste good because sugar is what makes it magic. It brings the magic, right? Prayer without a certain ingredient is actually dangerous, in my opinion. That ingredient is humility.
Yeah.
Here's what happens when we pray without humility. We actually just confirm our own bias.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Do you know how many times I've done this in my life? Countless. I've wanted something to happen, and I prayed about it. But I wasn't really trying to surrender to God. Because prayer is not about like, all right, God, give me this thing I want. Prayer is, God, what do you want me to have or not have? Prayer is surrender. It's the key ingredient. Prayer without humility is confirmation bias. And we all naturally want to confirm our own biases. I'm telling you, I could give you 100 examples from my life of this. It's just like how many times I've done this. You know, some of the greatest atrocities the world's ever seen were committed in the name of God with the blessing of prayer. I studied out the Crusades in college. And the Crusades were Christian mission. Wild. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
How did that happen? Deception. People were deceived. And what they did is they gave in to their own hate and heart of revenge and called it God's way. Right? This is a humble prayer right here. Search me, O God. Type that wrong. Not of God, but O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I love this prayer because it's so genuinely humble.
Yep.
God, I want you to tell me if my heart is pure right now.
Yep.
That's what it looks like to love God with all your heart. You say, God, I want you to look in my heart and tell me, what do you see? That's what I need to know. That's hard to do. And the truth is, only you know if you're doing that. Right? And we all need two things, humility and honest people.
Yep.
Saul needed Samuel. Do you see the transition that Saul makes? We're going to end with this. Saul sticks to his guns, right? And Samuel says, what's going on here? And Saul's like, no, it's not what you think. And Samuel's like, but it is. And Saul's like, but it's really not. And then Samuel's like, boom! And he drops the hammer.
Yeah.
And what does Saul admit? He says, I have sinned. I was afraid. You see that? He knew the whole time what was going on. And I don't even think he was outright lying. I think it was just self-deception.
Yeah.
I think he was just like, no, I can't deal with the consequence. I'm so terrified of Samuel. I can't deal with the consequences of my disobedience. And when he finally got down to it, he said he was afraid. And I really connected with this when I went through my recent situation with this conversation, because I told Jeff afterward, after crying actually, I cried because I felt so bad. I said I was afraid. I was afraid of what this guy was going to think of me if I was honest with him. And it came out, and I'm trying to repent of that, right? And the obvious question for you, what does your heart tell you? You know what's interesting is that to a certain degree, your heart almost operates independently from your brain. Like I love, Luke, what you said. You can intellectually know something, but doesn't mean you feel it here.
Yeah.
That's a very normal part of Christianity. And what I have found is that if you wait to feel the right thing before you do the right thing, you'll never do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you almost never feel it first.
Right.
You ever felt that before?
Right.
I just feel like when people say, like, well, I just want to, even when I'm saying the Bible to people or whatever, introducing them to Jesus, people are like, well, I just don't feel it. I'm like, well, maybe it's because you're not doing it. Like, the choice to love God, to follow Him, oftentimes is a choice you make before it's a feeling you feel.
Yeah.
And the Bible's very clear that actually the heart generally will follow the choice. Do the right thing. With that humble heart, I think God will change your heart. And
Yes.
that's the part we don't have time for that would be relevant, is that in time, you're always going to have to mistrust your heart. I trust my heart more now than I did 10 years ago, but I still don't totally trust my heart.
Right.
Right.
Because I've learned my heart. I know what my heart really wants. I know how it tries to preserve my image. I know how it wants to make me feel about things. And so I avoid the truth about whatever. What about you? Well, how does your heart lie to you? What lies do you give into? 'Cause everybody in this room, I know, doesn't give in to every lie your heart tells. In fact, you probably don't even give in to most of them. But that thermal exhaust pipe on the Death Star, what's the one or two that you're like, man, this one gets me every time. Like, I keep giving into it every time. Whatever it may be, right? Loving God with all your heart. Obviously, there's so much we could talk about. We need people in our lives to speak into our lives. And we need personally to have the humility to stand before God and say, God, whatever you want from me, you got it. Amen?
Yeah.
Let's take a moment. You should have a communion cup right there. We're going to say a prayer now, take communion, and then we'll have a brief song, and then I'll end with just a few announcements as we look ahead to what's coming up over the next couple months, okay?